Good afternoon or morning, wherever you are. Apologies, I haven't shaved. It's a weekend off. I just thought I'd do a bonus book review show. It's Saturday afternoon. Ipswich are playing in an hour's time, or Ipswich are losing in an hour's time. A predictive statement there. So I've got 11 books for you today, a first team of 11 books. So we are talking about my favorite books that are not World War II or World War One. There are other periods of history. We skip back and forth over various centuries, and they come with my endorsement. And as soon as this program is over, I will post all the links below. I've got them all ready to go. It just could take me 2 minutes to add them into YouTube. I didn't want to do it in advance in case it spoils the excitement of which books are Woody going to recommend. So first things first, let's start with our first book, and it is Zulu Rising by Ian Knight. It is a very big, comprehensive book about the Zulu Wars, Rorke's Drift, iSandlwana. Ian Knight is probably the most regarded Zulu Wars, South African, British Empire history historian. I'll be honest, again, with most of these books, I haven't read widely on the Zulu Wars, so I wouldn't necessarily know much to compare it to other ones, but his peers say he is the guy. So I would definitely recommend that book. The only thing is, I would suggest if you wanted to read that one, you either use something like Google Earth for your maps, or you use an Osprey book. There's an Osprey book on the Zulu Wars to get better maps, because the text is brilliant, but the maps are a little bit small and black and white, and to get an idea of the terrain, if you want to follow the battles, in terms of just following the politics behind it, all of the various sort of decisions at the top level, and Zulu chiefs and British and South African, and all the players there, that's covered very well. But if you want to, when you get to the actual battles, maybe having some kind of other colorful map might help you out a bit with understanding how they went. But that's my first book, Zulu Rising by Ian Knight. It's available. The link will be there, but it's a big one, so don't start it if you've only got a passing interest. But it's really good read. Similarly, I live in Bayeux, just down the road from the cathedral, just down the road from the Bayeux Tapestry, and I don't take people on my tours to the Bayeux Tapestry. I sometimes recommend it. They can go and see it before my tour, after my tour, the next day, whatever. But I have a passing interest in the Norman Conquest and the history, because I live in Normandy. Why would I not be interested? And so a couple of years ago, maybe more than that now, I was looking for a kind of a single volume book that would give me a good kind of ground knowledge of the events that lead up to the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And the book I recommend on that subject is The Norman Conquest by Marc Morris. It's a very authoritative account, but it's also got a bit of humor in it. I like the fact at the beginning he explains, look, I'm paraphrasing, we're not going to start in 1066. We have to go back 200 or 300 years. And you're thinking, really? Do we need to go back 200 or 300 years to understand that? Yeah, you do. Because it goes back through all the kings and the Vikings and Norwegians and Germanic peoples. And it explains all the backstory that led to the two claims for the throne that ended up with William the Conqueror, William the Bastard, if you prefer, and, fighting in Hastings for the English crown, or the whatever you want to call it. So it's reasonably thick, but it's a good account. It's he knows his stuff, does Marc Morris. He's also written about castles and chateaus. He appears on TV. He's quite a friendly guy on Twitter and Facebook as well. So again, it comes with, it's not so much I know about the subject. It was recommended by people like on the back there, the blurb, Dan Snow, Evening Standard. The Times recommend it as being a good account about the Norman Conquest. So that's my second book. If you want to know about that period of medieval history and living in Normandy, I haven't got many books, but that is the one many books about that period of history. But that is one of the ones that I would now suggest, particularly when Americans say to me, I've seen the tapestry, or Brits or Canadians, what can I read more about it? That's pretty good. It explains things, because the Bayeux Tapestry, for all its importance as a medieval artifact, the museum tells the story kind of one way, and these days there are various ways of interpreting, if you like, the politics and the meaning and the symbolism in the Bayeux Tapestry. And not that this is an explanation of the Bayeux Tapestry per se, but it does explain all the intrigue and the fighting and the infighting and the families and the backstabbing and the literally backstabbing and figuratively backstabbing. So that's the second book there, The Norman Conquest by Marc Morris. So there we are. Next one is a recent book, and it was quite controversial. It kind of divided people. I bought it in London at a bookstore near one of the train stations, and I kind of read it over 2 nights. And it's some of you will be familiar with it. It's called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, and it is about, well, as you can see there, the untold lives of the women killed by Jack the Ripper. I've read quite a lot about the Jack the Ripper over the years, the various theories as to who it was. This isn't about Jack the Ripper. It's about the women. It's about the victims. It's basically, her point was to give a voice to the women who were killed. And she makes a compelling case that they're not all prostitutes, basically. I think 1 or 2 kind of definitely were. 2 definitely were. And there's kind of a grey area over the 5th. But the point is, it's not really about the Jack the Ripper murders. What it does is it highlights the plight of women at that time, late 19th century in Britain, and how many ordeals they had to face, and puts you in the position of what happens if your husband dies or your husband leaves you and you've got kids, and the few choices open to women who have fallen, shall we say, on hard times. And the reason it got a bit of negative, some people loved it and some people hated it. The people who hated it were the people who said some of the stuff she's saying is conjecture, but she is saying that some of the stuff previously said about the women is also conjecture, and she wanted to study it again afresh and look at the lives about these 5 women. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. Don't be put off thinking it is some kind of feminist revisionist. Sure, I'm sure Hallie would probably count herself as a feminist, and it is giving these women a voice, but it's not. I don't think it's not anti-men or anything. It's just a social commentary as much as anything else. But if you're wanting to read a book about Jack the Ripper where there's a speculation about who the Jack the Ripper is, this is not the book for you. It is about the victims. It's putting a backstory to those women, and I really enjoyed it. And given the fact it's a bestseller in numerous countries, a lot of people enjoyed it as well. But some of the real Jack the Ripper kind of history people said it was not 100% accurate. Some of her claims were whatever. And yes, there is some of that. It is possible that, and we have to consider that it might be that in this book. But when you're talking about this era and people in this strata of life, there isn't necessarily very much documentation. So you have to fill in the gaps and put your own assumptions on things. But anyway, I found it a really good read, and so it's a really good social study of the conditions that women found themselves in the second half of the 19th century. So The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. That's my next choice. Moving to warfare again. Ever since I was about 12, 13 years old or whatever, and I saw the Charlton Heston, Sir Laurence Olivier film of Khartoum, I have been interested in Gordon of Khartoum. Also, coming from Essex, where I do, forts like Tilbury Fort and Coalhouse Fort were partly designed by General Gordon when he was in charge of Royal Engineers. So his influence on architecture, like Vauban in France, is interesting. So I kind of grew up in a place where talking about General Gordon was interesting. So Michael Asher, who I think was in a parachute regiment in the 80s or 90s, wrote this book called Khartoum and the Ultimate Imperial Adventure. It's not just about Khartoum. It, again, like the Marc Morris book, it covers maybe a couple hundred years or more of history in, the Sudan and Libya and all this. And it even the cover there, it's got that kind of boy's own adventure type book look about it, that it's going to be all about, sheikhs and Arab caravans and sandstorms and mysterious dark-eyed women riding camels. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff in it, to be fair, but it's also a really good readable account about the British Empire at that time, all the way through. So it's a 17th, 18th, 19th century, leading to General Gordon's demise at Khartoum. It also touches on the influence of those events on more modern politics. So that is quite interesting as well. But it's just it's quite thick, but it reads very well, and you feel you're getting good, solid history, but also it's kind of a page turner. It's a really well written book that you'll rattle through very, very quickly. So just hello Willie, Neil, Scott, Colin, Lorelei and Roman, how are you today? So that's my next book there. So Michael Asher, Khartoum, The Ultimate Imperial Adventure. And we will be heading back to Africa in other books later on. Next one, I did some prep about this about half an hour ago. And again, it is not a universally loved book. Some people really liked it and some people didn't like it. One of my little areas that I have read, I wouldn't say extensively about, but I've got maybe 5 or 6 books on it, is Custer's Last Stand, The Battle of Little Bighorn. And in recent-ish years, the best-selling book, which I'm recommending, is The Last Stand by Nathaniel Philbrick, who wrote The Heart of the Sea, which was made in that movie with who was in it? What's his name? The Irish guy. I forgot. And Ben Whishaw was in it. Brendan, the guy from the film Calvary. Colin, what's his name? He's in Bruges. He's in it. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but that's about The Heart of the Sea, which was a real story that kind of inspired Moby Dick. Anyway, The Last Stand is Nathaniel Philbrick's book about Custer, Sitting Bull, and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He's a journalist, writer, more than he is a historian. And I think that's some of the problem the historian people had with it. But also, I think in reading between the lines of the negative reviews, is he gives what I would think is a balanced view of it, where the Indians get a voice, the Americans get a voice. It's fairly unjudgmental in its assessment of the history. And so the people who kind of think Custer's a hero and that, you know, that the Indians deserve to be wiped out, Brendan Gleeson, that's the guy, though, they kind of didn't like The Last Stand because it was giving Sitting Bull and those kind of people a voice. But I really enjoyed it. That doesn't necessarily mean that I agreed with every one of his conclusions in there. I've got other books on the Battle of Little Bighorn that maybe drew different conclusions as to who was at fault. And there's one particular sort of part, a chapter in it, where he talks about something that may or may not have happened. I won't kind of bore you with the details, but the point is he does speculate on some of these rumors about the demise. I mean, there's one story that he addresses of Custer having been killed by his brother. Tom Custer actually put the fatal bullet in George, and he doesn't ignore those things. He addresses them and says, well, you know, there's not much evidence for this. But I found it a really good read, and the fact it sold like hotcakes is proof of the fact that a lot of other people did as well. And it's the sort of book, I think, that if you didn't have an interest in the Battle of the Little Bighorn before reading this book would whet your appetite for reading more about it. You kind of think, that's really interesting. I like that book, but now I want to read more. And that, of course, is what we all do in history. None of us stick with one book. You then move on to other books and you start getting hooked, and you want to work out your own version of events. But The Last Stand by Nathaniel Philbrick there is my next book. So about Little Bighorn and Custer, and again, it's not just a battle, it's before it and after it, and discusses it in how it's talked about in popular mythology as well. That was that one. And similarly, another book about Indians. This is probably of the 11 books I'm reviewing today. I have read The Custer Myth by W.A. Graham Bryan. I found it I found it not as easy a read as Philbrick's book, but I liked some information in it. Empire of the Summer Moon, Quanah Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches. And so we've gone from the very top of the USA in the Dakotas right down to the very south in Texas and Oklahoma. And by S.C. Gwynne. Again, this was a best-selling book, and I think, did they make it into a TV series, a mini-series? I can't remember. I've gone out of focus on my camera there. There we are. That's better. It's trying to pick up the book there. Just a really, really, really good read. You just rip through it, written like an adventure story, and it covers, you know, Quanah Parker's life, so 3 or 4 decades, and anyone who's kind of dipping their toe in the water with understanding Indian wars in the USA, this is a really good introduction, because people often have heard of Geronimo, so he was Apache, or they've heard of Sitting Bull, who was Sioux or Lakota. The Comanche maybe get a little bit forgotten, and I have an interest in the Comanche particularly because it was Comanche code talkers on Utah Beach that were the signal company for the 4th Infantry Division on June the 6th. So there's a D-Day connection with Comanches, and Quanah Parker was half Indian, half white, and anyway, it's just a really, really good read. It seems to me historically researched, well researched, but it also tells the stories in a gripping and engaging way. So if you wanted to start getting into the American Indian Wars, those 2 books would be a really good starting point. And then there's lots of others. Bill Yen wrote a book called Indian Wars, which I nearly put in this list, which is pretty good as well. And there's a really good book about the Comanche as a people that I forget who the author was now. I'm not doing American Civil War books in this show, David, because I realized there'd be too many. This is everything except the American Civil War in this show, because there's only so much you can do. There's a book coming up on the Revolutionary War, but not Civil War in this show. I think I'd have to do a separate show about that. In fact, I might even do a separate show. This is about Gettysburg books, because I've got quite a few about that. But the next one, I'm stepping closer to where we are today. It's a more recent set book. And again, I've got several books on the Irish uprising revolution leading to the Civil War that began, you know, Easter 1916. So technically it was in the middle of the First World War, and some of the British troops there had come back from the Somme. But this is about what was happening in Dublin and Ireland generally. This is, I think, came out in the early 90s, this book. So it may not be as relevant as some more recent books where we've come kind of at the other end of the Troubles maybe now, and we're looking back a bit at that era with a different interpretation. But I really, I've got, I think, 5 or 6 books on Ireland at this time. And this Children of the Something Rather Corn was quite good. But of them, and I was trying to think of a single, for the point of this show is to kind of give you guys, if you have any interest in what I'm saying, kind of a single volume to start with, and then by all means go on and read about it again. But if you want to understand a little bit about what was happening in Ireland in 1916, this is a really good starting point. A Wind That Shakes the Barley is a good film as well, with Cillian Murphy about that time, although that actually goes up to the Civil War afterwards. And of course, Michael Collins is worth seeing with Liam Neeson as well. But this is a more thorough, it's a more of a historical study. And I was going to say I enjoyed it, but as an Englishman reading about Ireland, you kind of can't read it without a little bit of, you know, guilt about some of the policy decisions made by my country's government with dealing with what was happening in Ireland. So you're reading it with a, you know, oh, that was a bit dodgy, but that's important. History should be challenging. And Peter de Rosa is the author of this. So I'm not sure if he's Irish, or he might be American, but as a starting point to understand the Irish Rebellion, that was a really good book. And similarly, my next book, I was recommended by someone as a good starting point to understand the American Revolutionary War, or when the British decided they wanted to get tea from India instead, war. Just a joke. Angel in the Whirlwind by Benson Bobrick, The Triumph of the American Revolution. And I was recommended this by, I think it was Chris Anderson recommended. Then the same week, or like coincidentally, someone else recommended it to me, who, because I was saying I want to read a couple of books about the American Revolutionary War. And 2 people recommended this one to me, and so I bought it. And it's very well written. It's lots of quotes from the main players, the Adams and the generals and Washington, but it manages to cover the politics and the boring side of the meetings and the discussions and make them as interesting, and also cover some of the more exciting events, the kind of battle side of things and the horse journeys and that kind of stuff. It covers it all. And again, for a Brit who doesn't know much about the Revolutionary War, as a starting point, I thought it was a reasonably good place to start. There's another one called 1776 by someone else I considered, but I looked at the two of them and I thought, which one did I enjoy the most? And this was the one I enjoyed the most. So there we are, Angel in the Whirlwind. And yeah, comes with my heartiest recommendation. So I'm really rattling through these books today because I am. Next one, in a connection in a way with The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. This one is by Dr. Fern Riddell, Death in 10 Minutes, Kitty Marion, Activist, Arsonist, Suffragette. David McCulloch, that's the one, wrote 1776. Thank you, Nancy. That I knew the name would come to me, or someone would remind me. Dr. Fern Riddell, very well known on Twitter, and she started that shitstorm a year or so ago about the fact she's a doctor and she likes to be referred to as doctor, which historians came down either side of that argument, saying they do like being referred to as doctor or they don't. But that she that's the thing. She said she's worked for her doctorate. She wants to be known as a doctor, and that's fine. And she's kind of a big thing on TV. She has her own podcast and stuff. And I follow her on Twitter, and she's interesting and colorful and opinionated, with nothing wrong with that. So Kitty Marion was an actress who found herself involved in the suffragette movement. And I have read a little bit about the suffragette movement. And as much as I'm interested in the subject, the books were all a little bit boring. They were a bit beating me over the head with feminism. And this book is obviously talking about themes that are giving women a voice, but I didn't feel like I was being preached at. And also, it was talking about them, the suffragettes, as what in effect they were, the most successful terrorist organization, arguably, that Great Britain has ever seen. You know, they because they got results. The suffragette movement ended up, and you could say it wasn't a suffragette movement, it was times were changing, but whatever. The point is, you know, we've all seen that footage of the woman who ran out in the horse race and, you know, and made a point by committing suicide under a horse in cause. We've all seen that on YouTube and films and stuff. And Kitty Marion, in the end, went to the USA and was involved in the woman who was the woman who was the main kind of instigator of the right to abortion in the USA. And I've forgotten her name now, a radical feminist. She got involved with her. Anyway, what I found particularly harrowing in this book was the accounts of the suffragettes who were imprisoned by the British, who went on hunger strikes, who were then force fed by tubes down their throats, and all this kind of horrible stuff. And it was an aspect of the suffragette movement I didn't really know, because as a kid you grew up watching Mary Poppins, don't you, with the mum. Glynis Johns is going out singing the song about votes for women, and you kind of forget. Margaret Sanger, that's the one. Again, thank you. Come to my aid twice there, Nancy. You kind of had this romantic idea about the suffragettes as it being kind of Edwardian middle class and upper class ladies going out and talking in parks about, well, we should give the vote. And I guess that element exists in the suffragette movement. This reminds you more of the kind of grungy, making up nail bombs in apartments kind of side of the suffragette movement. And anyway, I really enjoyed it. It opened my eyes to something I didn't know. And I don't want to get into politics too much and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, when you read a book like this, I would argue that it will reinforce your idea that any women have the right to have control over their bodies. I'm not going to go much further than that. But these women were forced to do things against their will because of something they believed in. And I'll kind of leave it at that. And it shows you what powerful women did a century ago to fight for equality, if you like. So Death in 10 Minutes, about Kitty Marion, by Dr. Fern Riddell. And yeah, she's got a new book about Victorian Sex or something. Was that her last book? There's a new book about sex she's written that's coming out this year. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Again, I say I thoroughly enjoyed it. I found it a thoroughly rewarding read, but a lot of it was very harrowing. So don't read this as a kind of it's not a reading on the beach book when you're on holiday. It's not that kind of book. It's a kind of a wow, you'll be shocked by things. But yeah, and that clip of the woman being killed by the horse, kind of first reality video. So that is my next book. Next one, and again, this touches on politics in a roundabout way. And I was at Chalk Valley History Festival in 2019, and one of the speakers I saw was Jonathan Phillips, and I was there to speak myself and do various presentations about panzers and Sherman tanks and typhoons and stuff like that. But when I wasn't working, I had a free pass because I was a presenter to go and attend these other lectures, and they have like 6 main exhibition tents and people talking for an hour, like over about 10 hours. So about 120 odd historians speak, and I saw Jonathan Phillips speak about Saladin or Saladin, however you want to pronounce the Muslim leader, who was the guy who was the baddie. If you believe that the Crusaders were the goodies, Saladin was the baddie. Or if you're a Muslim, Saladin was the goodie and the Crusaders were the baddie. Or in a more objective way, neither side was particularly good, neither side was particularly bad. They were just fighting for beliefs. But this is the life and legend of the Sultan Saladin, or Saladin, by Jonathan Phillips. So if you've seen Kingdom of Heaven, which is one of my favorite films with Ridley Scott, with Orlando Bloom, this is the Siege of Jerusalem. You know the story. Saladin was one of the show, a bit like in Khartoum, with the Laurence Olivier character being the Mahdi. This is one of these figures that is meant to unite peoples against the whites, essentially. So Saladin in his era and the Mad Mahdi in his era are people who kind of got these forces together to try and fight the white guys, I suppose. But as interesting as all the story about Saladin's life is, which is all very interesting, it was the last few chapters where he talks about his Saladin's influence today in Muslim culture. It's a really good, because again, I don't want to go down off on a rabbit hole about politics and religion and stuff, but those of us that were brought up in a certain country with certain church around us are led to believe the other people who believed in other gods in different ways are bad, and for me, to understand religion, it's about reading the other religions and understanding where they come from. And Muslims get a bad press, understandably. Islamic extremists, it's not good, is it? But this is a really good understanding of how Muslim culture and Muslim rights and stuff has influenced society over years. And it's lovely. What I particularly liked about it was lovely, colorful illustrations. The color plates are really, really beautiful in the middle. It's not often these kind of bits you get color photos, and so that was really nice. And Jonathan Phillips was a really nice guy, and he signed me a book plate because I couldn't carry all my books home, so I got a signed copy of it there. And yeah, again, it got lots of good reviews by serious scholars of that era. So The Life and Legend of the Sultan Saladin by Jonathan Phillips, which leads me nicely into my concluding book, which is on the same subject, perhaps from the other point of view. And I'm sure some of you will have read this already, The Templars by Dan Jones. Dan Jones, who is that really good looking, and I've sat next to him and he is good looking. He's one of those kind of good looking men that you go, God, he's so good looking. Tattoos and stuff and trendy. He also did the book, The Color of Time, with Marina Amaral, the colorized photos. And Dan Jones is on lots of things these days, and he's consulted on TV shows. He's presented his own TV shows. And The Templars is there's an overlap, of course, with this, with no, that was Fern Riddell's book, and with the Saladin book, because it's talking about the same era, of course. But the Templars takes you all through the role of the Knights Templar in the whole thing. So it is the Crusades, but it's the Crusades from the point of view of the Templar history, which if you've watched the Nightfall, the show that was on a couple of years ago with who was in that one? I've forgotten who was in that one now. But anyway, the Templars is a really good read, and it's one of those ones that you start and you think, oh, it's a big one, and you realize before too long you've got halfway through it, because it's really, really good writing style. And Dan Jones knows his stuff. He's a proper historian, and it sparked, in fact, because this is maybe 5-6 years old now, a whole raft of books about Templars have come out these days. In fact, there's lots of documentaries as well. Templar Knights kind of getting a reappraisal, thanks perhaps to the TV show and films. And what I learned from reading about the Templars and the Muslims is that, and you can also apply the same to Custer and the Indians, is that we tend to have read those books from the point of view of goodies and baddies. And actually, when you read it objectively, you can make a case that there are goodies and baddies on both sides. It's conflict. It is World War II, I suppose, is purely a war about where there are goodies and baddies. But most wars are just two rival factions wanting power or territory or whatever. And who is the right and who is wrong is slightly more complicated. But the Templars I found to be a really good, interesting read. So, yeah, and as indeed you said there, Scott, understanding the Crusades and understanding the reaction to the Crusades is important to understand where we are today. It's important to understand these legacies and how long these things have been going on. I haven't read anything on the Punic Wars. I'll have to go back and look at that as well, I suppose, at some point. And when we talk about rivalries, and we talk about this, there's this modern way, isn't there, about we go to a country, we liberate it from a tyrannical reign, and we say, okay, here you are, here's McDonald's, here's democracy, don't break it, and we walk away. Well, the fact is these cultures haven't had, in some cases, workable democracies for centuries, if not millennia. And the way their countries have got to where they are now is complicated and long. And when you look at countries like Syria and Afghanistan and the Korea, and you realize just how much complicated history there is going back centuries, and how the fixes and solutions are not always easy. But I always feel if you've widely read on the subjects, your chances of understanding and concluding are greater than if you just read internet memes. Unfortunately, that is the way we are. We are spoon-fed these little quick sound bites about other cultures and other wars and other peoples and other religions and beliefs. And actually, what you need to do is read decent books, read it and look at these things objectively, and look at the themes of, as I say, goodies and baddies. So that is the end of today's show. I'd really like to know what you have read about other periods of history that are books that you have found to be really rewarding and really interesting, because I don't get much time these days to go and read things that aren't World War II. My World War II reading list for shows coming up in May is staggering. So I don't know when I'll be able to get any chance to read about Civil War or Punic Wars or medieval history again. But these are all books I have read over the last few years and have found something in them of value. So that was my 11 books. There are other books that I pulled off the shelf and then put back again. I say 1776 by David McCulloch was one of the ones I thought about putting that one up there. Then I decided to go for Angel and the Whirlwind instead. But yeah, Custer. There's several books about Custer that I found something in all of them. So I don't want to say any of these books are definitive in the sense that I don't think any subject have I ever just stuck with one book on. I think I always want to go and read more, and because that's the way my brain works, to try and get to the truth, should it be. So there we are. I'm going to leave you with that, and I will do an American Civil War books show at some point. I will probably do some 1812, and I haven't. Napoleonic Wars is something I haven't touched either, really. because there's only so much time. I don't think I own a single book on the Napoleonic Wars. So Roman, who's watched this, probably thinking, surely, I just haven't. Other than watching the Sharp series, that's about my only entry level Napoleonic Wars. But in fact, when I started, I'm going off a tangent. When I started reading about the American Civil War, and I've got a half a bookshelf about the Civil War, I realized, oh my God, there's so many books about this. It's how long do I spend on it? That's why I side shifted to American Indian Wars, because I found there was slightly fewer books about the American Indian Wars, and maybe I could kind of get to grips with that subject better than the Civil War, which, like D-Day, has spawned so many books and so many theories and counter theories. And the Civil War, the thing that gets on my nerves about that, not on my nerves, is the constant reevaluation. Robert E. Lee is great. Robert E. Lee is terrible. Meade is great. Meade is terrible. Grant is brilliant. Grant is terrible. I can't keep up with the latest thinking about some of these things. It's just, I'm not in that world. Dave Collins, who lives near Gettysburg, who's, does lecturing on Gettysburg, like with World War II, I guess when you're in that world, you've got to keep up with all these new theories, these new considerations. But with Civil War, I read occasionally, sporadically, for fun, really, although reading about war isn't fun. But there we are. That's it. I'm going to leave you with that because it's football starting soon, and only 3 games of the season to go. So it's Ipswich v Swansea today. Swansea already been relegated, so they've conceded 30 goals in the last 8 matches or something incredible, and Ipswich haven't scored in 6 matches. So it's kind of a real, we'll see. And those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize. Football is the other part of my life. Anyway, there you go. Thanks for watching, everybody. I will see you all again. Don't forget, next week, Resistance Week starts. All the shows I'm looking forward to. I'm particularly looking for the show about the Chetniks and the partisans. My guest sent me through the list of kind of topics he wanted to discuss. It's like, yeah, perfect. I've struggled for years to understand just exactly the politics of what was going on in Yugoslavia during World War II. So that show next week in an hour, I think, will be a good entry-level understanding of just exactly who all these players were. Chetniks, partisans, Tito, the politics. How did it influence Barbarossa? Did it influence Barbarossa? What was the Allies' policy there? That we're going to address in the show next week, along with other shows about the resistance and spying. So there we are. That's Resistance Week next week on World War II TV. Don't forget, check out our Patreon page. Check us out on social media, and I'll be posting the links to buying these books in about 2 minutes' time. So if there's any of these books that kind of whet your appetite and you want to go and buy them, just hold this space, refresh this page in a couple of minutes, and all the links will be there to go and purchase the books. That's it. Have a good afternoon or evening or morning, wherever the hell you are. This is Paul Woodedge signing out. I will see you next week. Cheers. Goodbye.